Across the UK.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
With Stephen Nolan.
Okay, good evening to you. Welcome along. We're going to be talking about Margaret Thatcher's legacy in just a moment, because, of course, of the new film that's gone on general release this weekend. In the Iron Lady, our former Prime Minister is played by Meryl Streep. Have a listen to this scene from her later years, where she's just been examined by her physician.
Do you know, one of the great problems of our age is that we are governed by people who care more about feelings than they do about thoughts and ideas. Now, thoughts and ideas, that interests me. Ask me what I'm thinking.
What are you thinking, Margaret?
What's your thoughts, for they become words? What's your words, for they become actions? What's your actions, for they become habits? What's your habits, for they become your character? And what's your character, for it becomes your destiny? What we think, we become. My father always said that. And I think I am fine.
Though the film's been praised for Meryl Streep's uncanny portrayal of Margaret Thatcher, some people think it's in poor taste because she is now elderly and frail. David Cameron has seen it.
It's a fantastic piece of acting by Meryl Streep, but you can't help wondering why do we have to have this film right now? It is a film much more about aging and elements of dementia rather than about an amazing Prime Minister. And my sort of sense was a great piece of acting, really staggering piece of acting, but a film I wish they could have made another day.
So, how do you think Margaret Thatcher should be remembered? As one of the finest Prime Ministers Britain's ever had, the head of a reforming government which dragged the country into the 21st century? Or was she an anti-union destroyer of the country's industrial and mining heartlands and a friend of the dictator, General Pinochet, for example? 0500 909 693. Conor Burns is the Conservative MP for West Bournemouth and a friend of the Thatcher family. Conor, good evening to you.
Good evening.
And John McDonnell, Labour MP for Hayes and Harlington. Hello to you, John.
Hi.
You, of course, were Ken Livingstone's deputy in the Greater London Council, arguably the biggest thorn in the side of Thatcher's government in the 1980s. Conor, have you seen the movie?
I haven't. I'm going to see it tomorrow afternoon. I've seen some of the snippets of it.
What have you thought of the snippets so far?
What I thought about the snippets, to be totally objective about it, Meryl Streep eerily and cannily captures elements of how Lady Thatcher is today. But what she doesn't capture in the bits where she's doing the Lady Thatcher of today is that there are still glimpses of the genius and the brilliance that made her the incredibly remarkable Prime Minister that she was.
That movie, Conor, I watched it this afternoon, and it very much shows the ageing process. It very much portrays dementia in its in the hardness and the coldness that it can be to an individual that is suffering from it. And you are left as a viewer thinking to yourself that is how Margaret Thatcher is now. Is it?
It isn't. And I'm going to struggle. I'm going to go and see it tomorrow afternoon. I've booked the tickets earlier this evening. I'm going with a friend to watch it in Leicester Square. And I'm also going, as I do many Sunday evenings, to see Lady Thatcher tomorrow evening at 6:30 for a drink. And what I'm picking up on the snippets is that I'm going to see a portrayal of somebody whose memory is entirely clouded, who is very unhappy, who's reflecting on a life that maybe didn't do everything she wanted to do. And what I will see tomorrow evening, what I see most Sundays, is a lady who is happy, who's still interested in what's going on around her, still loves nothing more than to talk about politics, what's going on in the world, what's going on in other countries, what's going on in the Conservative Party. A lady whose whole life was politics and is still incredibly forward-looking. I remember some weeks ago saying to her, you must sometimes look around the room, Margaret, and think to yourself, not bad at all, when you see the pictures of Chequers and the number 10 and the silver bowl that's on top of the mantelpiece that her cabinet gave her on her 10th anniversary. And she sort of paused and said, yes, I do, but I always remember what my father said, it's what you do next that counts, not what you did last. So even in her diminished condition with her 86 years, she is still somebody who's focused and interested in the future.
Well, whether it is true or not, and you're saying it's not, and you're a friend
I'm saying it's
of,
not
of
entirely
the
accurate.
family.
It's not entirely accurate.
How fair is it, even if it were accurate, how fair is it, Conor, to do that on someone who is still alive, who would be suffering from dementia? Or because you're a public figure, are you fair game, even if it is an illness?
Well, I have to say this to you. The press were very, very good for many, many years in recognising that Lady Thatcher was now beyond contemporary politics, and it wasn't any of her close friends who brought her struggles into the public arena. Carol wrote about it in her book, and that, of course, is Carol's right as her daughter. The one thing I can tell you, Stephen, is that Lady T won't watch it. She has never watched anything about herself. She's actually, in a funny way, remarkably modest about that. If she's in the newspaper, she'll turn it over. If she comes onto the television, she'll turn it off. So it won't cause any hurt to her directly, but it obviously is causing some distress to her friends and some of her family.
Why wouldn't you watch it?
She's never been interested in watching anything about herself, ever. She's always taken a view that even when she was in Number 10, she reportedly never read any of the newspapers directly. She relied on a press digest, and she once said that if you read something, even if you knew it yourself to be wrong, it would play on your mind and it would put you off.
In the context of someone who has seen that movie today, Conor, that's me. Is Lady Thatcher seriously mentally ill?
No, Lady Thatcher is someone who's now 86, and she has some of the struggles that some people have as they get older. This is a lady who still goes out to lunch with friends, still goes out for walks most days.
On her own?
Obviously, she as a former Prime Minister, has a protection detail and a car, so she has people with her, but she takes people out to lunch. There's a regular series of friends who come in to visit her. Bernard Ingham's still a regular, Sue Tinson, Crawford still comes down, her long-time personal assistant. This is a lady whose life is not as empty as I understand this film is trying to portray it.
It'll be really interesting, Conor, and I'm not sure if I'll have an opportunity. If I would really like to. It would be intriguing to talk to you tomorrow night after you've seen the movie. John MacDonald, what's your reaction?
Look, I detest everything Thatcher ever stood for, and virtually, every policy she promoted. But I never personalised my politics at all. And if the film is portraying the woman with dementia, and she hasn't, I can see how that's distressing to her family. And I think that's inappropriate. And we've experienced dementia and Alzheimer's in my own family, and I know how distressing it is. And if she isn't suffering from that, well, it's just, as I say, it's just not fitting, to be honest. And I say that as someone who, as I say, detested everything she ever stood for. But as I say, as an individual, I can see how family and friends of hers would be upset if that's the way she's portrayed, and it's untrue. If it is untrue.
Let me just pause for a moment or two, if you will. A male nurse has been arrested on suspicion on tampering with records at Stepping Hill Hospital in Greater Manchester. Is now being questioned on suspicion of 3 counts of murder. Let's get the latest from our correspondent Judith Moritz. What do we know about this nurse, Judith?
Stephen, this has just come into us in the last few minutes from Greater Manchester Police. This is a 46-year-old male nurse at Stepping Hill Hospital. He was arrested, you may remember, earlier in the week on Thursday on suspicion of tampering with medical records at the hospital. He's been in police custody since then, being questioned by detectives. But tonight, in the last few minutes, Greater Manchester Police have said that they have now arrested him again, re-arrested him if you like, but this time on suspicion of 3 counts of murder and 18 counts of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. Now, that relates to the suspicion that medical products, saline products particularly, saline drips and so on, were contaminated with insulin at Stepping Hill, which is a hospital just near to Stockport, during a period between the 1st of June and the 15th of July last year. 3 people, Greater Manchester Police say, died. They are Tracy Arden, Arnold Lancaster and Derek Weaver. And a further 18 people were poisoned but survived. In fact, 17 survived and the 18th died more recently. And so the police are now questioning this male nurse on suspicion of doing that, of that contamination and of those murders and people having been poisoned.
Judith, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate that. It's 16 minutes past 11. Let's come back to what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about Lady Thatcher. Of course, the movie, The Iron Lady, is out now. I've gone and seen it. Conor Burns, the Conservative MP for West Bournemouth, and a friend of the Thatcher family is with us tonight. John MacDonald, the Labour MP for Hayes and Harlington, with us tonight as well. John, you said that you detest everything that Thatcher stood for in terms of politics. Everything?
Yes, I can't think of anything, to be honest. I went through that period, and I can remember the number of people who were on the dole, the number of people who suffered so badly. The areas, particularly up north in this country, where whole communities were laid to waste, and the immense poverty and suffering that people went through. And the policies she set out, and I think there needs to be a film about the Thatcher period, not about her as an individual, but about the policies and the politics that she represents. There needs to be a film now that accurately reflects what the consequences of those policies are, because I think she laid the foundation stones for many of the real suffering and problems that we're facing today.
Conor?
Well, I mean, I think John sort of hides his light under a bushel a little bit there. I mean, John joked, or he said he joked, but he got a massive round of applause during the Labour leadership contest of Labour hustings to say that if he could turn the clock back and go back to the 80s and do one thing, it would be to assassinate Margaret Thatcher. So John clearly has very strong views about her period. I would put other views. I mean, the number of people you meet even today who talk about how her policy of council house sales gave them the first time the opportunity to own property, how the privatisation programme gave people the opportunity to own shares in the businesses they worked in. She took on a Britain that was on its knees, a Britain that was ungovernable because of the trade union dominance, and she stood up to the cloth-capped colonels of the TUC and made government, the democratically elected governments, the rulers of Britain. And I think every Prime Minister after her owes her a debt of gratitude for that.
You can let us know what you think at home. Your view on Lady Thatcher, 0500 909 693. Conor, maybe you can stay with us for a second or two. Tony Bennett is one of a group of trade unionists and female activists, veterans of the miners' strike, who held a protest outside the film in Derbyshire today. Why, Tony? Why have the protest?
Well, it was important that people recognise the fact that the damage that Margaret Thatcher did, and it was really interesting to hear the comments made by the previous speakers about what Margaret Thatcher actually did. I mean, she's portrayed as a woman who stood up for other women and pursued and pushed for other women to, be able to come to the forefront. She never actually did this at all. I mean, Margaret Thatcher was out for Margaret Thatcher, and her full aim was to destroy the working class, to destroy the communities, the mining communities, whatever.
I'm sure Conor would like to challenge you.
Well, I think it was a very good rebuttal to a point that I didn't make. I mean, everyone acknowledges that Margaret Thatcher was not a part of the sisterhood, as it were. She only ever brought one woman into her cabinet. That was Janet Young from the House of Lords. No one argues that Margaret Thatcher was somebody who promoted women. That's not an accusation I'm going to answer, because it's absolutely true. I think what Margaret Thatcher was motivated about was about giving unions back to their members. She had seen what had happened with the closed shop when people were forced out on strike, the flying pickets, the secondary picketing, all of that. She wanted to give those unions back to the members. And if I may say to you, I remember that period as a very young man, and I think your union was very badly let down indeed by the leadership of Arthur Scargill.
But you see, you portray the members of the union as being mindless morons who didn't have a brain cell to think for themselves. The members of the union, and my husband was a Nottinghamshire miner, they listened to the debate. My husband was on strike the whole time, I have to say. They listened to the debate. They weren't mindless morons that listened to one person and said, right, he says, that's what we're going to do. They made the decisions unanimously. And the fact that Arthur Scargill was the leader was really insignificant.
But if you know, it was very significant. And by the way, I would never call
sorry.
anyone mindless morons. That's not sort of language I use.
What you have to recognise is the fact the miners' strike was not about wages. It was about preserving jobs and communities.
Okay, let me bring in the Falklands veteran, Gordon Hogan, tonight. Hello, Gordon.
Good evening.
You're not a Conservative, but you do admire Lady Thatcher, don't you?
Oh, definitely, 100%. She was a Iron Lady. She was known as Iron Lady, and she fought for what Britain, us Great Britain. You know. I went to war, and Maggie Thatcher was the one that stood up and said she gave the Falklands people the opportunity. Do you want to be British, or do you want to be ruled by Argentina? And she turned around and said, well, we want to be ruled by Britain.
And you met her as an elderly lady, didn't you?
Pardon?
You met her as an elderly lady?
Yes, I met her in 2007 on a 25-year pilgrimage in the Union Jack Club in London. And she came in and there was 280 of us there, ready to fly out the next day, and she was a fantastic lady.
Let me bring in Sean in Oxfordshire. Hello, Sean.
Hello.
What do you think, Sean?
I don't think history will ever make its mind up about Margaret Thatcher. I think if you're on the right, you think she saved the country. If you're on the left, you think she destroyed it. And there are arguments, perfectly legitimate arguments for and against in both cases. What fascinates me is the myth that has emerged around her. And this myth relates to the late part of her premiership. For most of her premiership, Margaret Thatcher was far more pragmatic than is ever acknowledged. What is one of the most controversial issues in politics even now? Europe. What did Margaret Thatcher do? And I bet John McDonnell supported this, or I'd like to think he did. She signed the Single European Act. Now, that's the thing that pushed us closer to European integration, that pushed us closer to the Maastricht Treaty and everything else that's followed since. And she was completely moderate on it.
Okay.
And what did she do with her cabinet? For most of her time, she was surrounded by wet Tories, by One Nation Tories, and it was only in the final couple of years of her premiership that she almost started to believe her own publicity and turned on her own people through the poll tax in a manner that she would never have done 10 years earlier.
Sean, we're going to leave it there because we need to move on. Thank you for your call tonight. John McDonnell, thank you. Conor Burns, you're going to watch the movie tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow afternoon.
I'll be very interested to get your view on it. Conor, just before...